Hey, Tyson here from Refuge Church in Lenoir City, Tennessee. Thank you for listening to our message today. Refuge Church is a family of faith sent to proclaim hope in Jesus Christ through relationships. For more resources and information about Refuge, please visit us on the web at refugeph.com.
All right. So, who's at the helm? This is the question that I wanted to answer today. As we're going to spend some time at the end of the service ordaining Jared, we started thinking about, one of our goals at Refuge is to encourage families to live out their faith together. And this is a perfect opportunity when we talk about bringing on a deacon, which is a leadership position. And in a leadership position, yes, it's a leadership position here at church, but what is expected of deacons, and when Rodney reads the qualifications for a deacon here later in the service, it's talking about them leading spiritually their home. And I think this is a good opportunity for us to think about that, not just for deacons, but for all of us, is to think about who's leading our home spiritually. I've done student ministry for a long time before I was a pastor, and I used to take this poll, and I've decided I'm going to risk it today, and I'm going to take a poll today. If you're an adult, I would like for you to raise your hand if your dad was the spiritual leader of your home. 15%, maybe. Maybe 20%. And it really should be much higher than that. Don't we agree? The Bible clearly tells us that men should be spiritual leaders of their home. And I do want to defend men for a moment. I do think men are more personal with their faith. I think men get up early sometimes and do their quiet time so that nobody sees them. I think that's part of who men are. They don't do it for show. So I do realize that. But I also think it's important for men to be leaders in their homes and to be seen by their families. And we're going to talk about that today. If you just imagine you're on a ship sailing through a storm and there's all these things crashing in with waves and winds and culture and distractions of this world, where is this ship, which is your family, where's it going? And who's in control? Because if you don't have a plan, and if you don't have a clear leader, you're going to leave your destination to chance of the winds and the waves. Now, there's always unexpected things that come in life, but if you have no plan, then you're completely to chance. But if you have a goal, if you have a destination in mind, if you have someone who is clearly steering the ship, you at least have the direction that you want to go. And that's what I want us to think about today. We cannot lead our families and just hope for the best just by hoping that it turns out without a plan. So it's a choice that we have to make every day. The spiritual future of our homes are at stake. So who sets the example in the family? Who sets the course? Who determines where you're headed? And I want to start off by reading Deuteronomy chapter 6. This is a passage that Jewish people know very well. It's called the Shema, and they'll quote it almost daily. They'll quote about 3 of these verses daily. We're going to read a little bit past the Shema, but this is something that they're reminded of every day. Moses wrote this, and this is what he says in Deuteronomy chapter 6. He says, "Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Now, there's some important pieces in that for us. Who is the Lord of your family? Who is, at the end of the day, who's controlling our family is the Lord. But who's trying to direct us in that direction is the question I'm asking today. But what the writer here is trying to tell us is that who is the Lord of our household? And what that comes down to is there's going to come times when we have to make a decision as a family, and it's going to be serious enough that we have to choose between maybe even 2 good things. And the question is, who is Lord? Are we going to follow what God says for our family to do, or are we going to do what the world says? Who determines who we listen to? We should listen to the Lord. That's why he starts off with the Lord our God. The Lord is one. Verse 5, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. It starts with this idea of leadership is that we need to be people who love God. And our families need to see that, right? They need to see us loving God and doing what he calls us to do. Look at verse 6. It says, these words I'm giving to you today are to be on your heart. He wants this to be internal for us. This is the whole point of the Holy Spirit coming at Pentecost, is to put God internal to us. Now, this is in the Old Testament, and what he's saying is we need to write these words, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We need to put that in our heart. It needs to be something that we live by, not just words on the wall. So, like in our house, we have Bible verses on the wall. We actually have one over our door going out the front door, Philippians 4:13, and we have Joshua 24 in our basement. I was looking at it this morning when I was studying this. And you know what those words on the wall mean? They mean nothing unless they're in our heart. Right? And this is what he's trying to say. Don't just put Bible verses around your house and not live out what God has called you to live out. There has to be, those things have to line up. It needs to be written on your heart. Verse 7. He says, repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road and when you lie down and when you get up. Whose responsibility is it to repeat it to the children? It's the parents, right? Now, we have student ministry here and we have children's ministry, and they do a fantastic job. But you know, it's not the Awanas teacher's job to teach your child to follow Jesus Christ. It's not Austin's job to teach your child to follow Jesus Christ. Now, he's here to help. Awana's here to help. But they need to see it modeled at home. Now, there are children who come here that their parents are not Christians. And yes, Austin and the Awana teachers take a leadership role in that because the parents are not. But by and large, it should be done in the home. We're here to support and to help, and we want to do that. But it says to raise your children. Awana and student ministry gets your children for maybe 2 hours a week, maybe 3 at the most. But you get to spend days and hours with them, and that's where they're going to learn it. He says you need to repeat this to your children. Talk about it when you sit in your house, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. I think these words themselves are even specific enough when you think about it. When you're just sitting in your house, talk about the Lord. When you're walking along the road, as you're going throughout your day, as you're living life, you talk about the Lord. When you lie down, when you get up, it should be the last thing you think about. It should be the first thing you think about when you get up. These things are important. It should be at the forefront of our mind, and it shouldn't be just something we do on Sundays. It says, bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be a symbol on your forehead. In the past, I've talked about this, that they use this word phylactery, where they take these boxes. Jewish people would take these boxes and they would literally write this scripture and put it in this box, and they would tie it to their hand. They would even tie it on their forehead. I've showed you this picture before. You may have remembered it. It's called a frontlet, and they would literally tie these verses and put it in this box on the front of their forehead to try to live this out as literal as possible. This is what he's talking about, and I'm not saying we should do that, but it should be in our heart. It should be at the forefront of our mind, and it should be every time we use our hands, we should think about God and what he's done. And that's the thought process behind it. It should be at the forefront of our mind. Verse 9, write them on the doorpost of your house and on the city gates. You're telling your family as they leave or as they enter, this is a place where God is the Lord of this house. You're telling your neighbors, this is a place where we follow the Lord. And it says even put it on your city gates. Right? If we could, we would. This city, we follow the Lord. That's how important it was. Jump down to verse 12. He says, be careful not to forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the place of slavery. We need to be people who remind our kids what God has done for us. We should always be telling our story about what God has done. When He answered that prayer, when He healed that person, when He saved us, when He did all these things, we need to tell people what God has done for us. We need to tell our families that. Verse 13, fear the Lord your God, worship Him, and take your oaths in His name. Do not follow other gods, the God of the peoples around you, for the Lord your God who is among you is a jealous God. We need to worship Him. Shouldn't our homes be a place that's full of worship? This is one of the things that I love about Shelley is she would always play worship music on the way to school, taking my kids to school. That was on the forefront of their mind on their way to school and when she picked them up so that they knew that in this house we worship the Lord. It's something very simple, but it conveys to your children who's number one in your life. Look at verse 17. Carefully observe the commands of the Lord your God, the decrees and statutes He has commanded you. And part of leadership is just being obedient. Right? We need to live out obedience in front of our children, to just do what is right. And sometimes that's very simple. When we're mistreated, we respond in the right way. We need to do what's right. We need to be obedient. Verse 18, do what is right and good in the Lord's sight. Look at verse 20. I'm going to jump down. It says, when your son asks you in the future, what is the meaning of these decrees and statutes and ordinances that the Lord your God has commanded you? Tell him, we were slaves of the Pharaoh in Egypt, but the Lord has brought us out of Egypt with a strong hand. Talk to your kids about being delivered. That's what this passage is about. Remember when God delivered us from slavery? Well, we weren't in literal slavery, but we were in slavery to sin, and He delivered us. And we need to tell our kids about that. I'm going to jump down to the next passage that I want us to focus on, which is Joshua chapter 24. And I think this passage is special. This is when I was downstairs this morning getting ready, this is the verse that we have on a plaque down there. And it's pretty special in our life, and I want you to hear this. Joshua had they're into the promised land, right? He had already delivered them out of Egypt. Moses had passed away. Joshua took them into the promised land, which was ultimately what they thought the end goal was to just get this land. If we get the land, then God's going to bless us. But the blessing was based on their obedience at that time, and they weren't following through. So Joshua lays out this whole history of everything that's going on, and he gets to the end of his letter. This is literally the last chapter in the book of Joshua, and this is what he says. Joshua 24:14, he says, therefore fear the Lord and worship Him in sincerity and truth. He says, listen, based on the history, based on all that we've been through, based on all the promises of God, the covenants, he says, we need to fear the Lord and worship Him with sincerity. Like we need to mean it. Like our kids know whether we mean it or not. He says we need to mean it, and we need to do it in truth. He says, get rid of the gods of your ancestors that worship beyond the Euphrates River and in Egypt, and worship the Lord. When our kids see us worship, it sends a message to them. I love sometimes when I see parents raising their hands in worship and their kids are with them, and sometimes their kids even raise their hands. I love to see that because they're seeing that their parents love the Lord and they want to be like their parents. That's part of this idea of leadership. And that's what he's talking about in this verse. And then look at verse 15. This is the verse that's quoted all the time. It says, but if it doesn't please you, we always look at the last part of this verse, and I really focused in on the first part of this verse. Look at what he says. But if it doesn't please you, to worship the Lord with sincerity, he said, if it doesn't please you to worship the Lord, choose for yourself today which you will worship. The gods of your ancestors worship beyond the Euphrates River, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you're living. He goes, listen, if you don't want to worship God sincerely, you got two other choices. You can worship those gods, which, oh, by the way, aren't real. That's your choice. He's laying it out for them to make a decision today on who they're going to worship. And look at what he says about his own house. At the end of that verse, he says, "But as for me and my family, we will worship the Lord." Now look at what he starts with. He says, "As for me." This is Joshua speaking. It starts with him. You know what that is? That's spiritual leadership. It says, regardless of what everybody else is going to do, despite what the world is going to choose on who they're going to worship, if you're in this house, I'm worshiping the Lord. And he says, not only am I going to worship the Lord, but he says, and my family will worship the Lord. That's leadership. That's what we've been called to, parents. Specifically men, this is what we've been called to. We have to make the decision. Joshua on this day made a choice. And he said, as for me and my house, we will choose the Lord. We're going to worship the Lord in this house. As long as you live in this house, we're going to worship the Lord. So I want us to think about that as we think about leadership and what that means. The leader of the man. Who is at the helm and who is steering your family by faith? Or are you leaving it by chance?
Thank you for listening to this message today brought to you by Refuge Church. Please visit our website for more resources as well as our YouTube channel. Just search for Refuge Church in Lenoir City, Tennessee to find us. We hope that this message has helped you find hope in Jesus Christ.